In this video, I'm going to discuss how to set up a unique ID between multiple objects of the same type. In the last video, we saw how I used a debug output to show what was going on in these forms. But now, I want to show you how to create multiple outputs showing different variables. But before we can do that, we need to learn how to set up distinct IDs for each object. We begin by demonstrating how three separate instances of the same object overlay because of the positioning of the last one. Each object, as you saw in the intro, has a position that is different from the last one. But in this case, I disabled the ID so they all have debug output 0 as the ID. Let's look down here at the next one. It's also debug output 0, and here's debug output 0. Let's select the first one, and we're going to go down here and we're going to change the right position just to demonstrate that there are three separate ones. Now I'm moving this one out slowly just so that you can see that it is an individual record. Now this is number 1. Okay, let's go to number 2 now and do the same thing. So I'm going to change this one up. This is interesting. Now if you'll notice, 2 and 3 appear to be going on the same setting. Why is that? Well, let me explain. 2 and 3 have the setting defined. So if we look up in here, so this is 300, this is the right, this one is set to right, and this one is set to right 50. So this is 50, this is 300, this is 550. So 550 is where this is supposed to be going, but they all ended up here. This is some of the things that are going to drive you nuts. So I am selecting this one, which is the second one, debug output number 2, and I'm going down here, select that, and I want to shift that so that it's in a different position. But 2 and 3 appear to be going together. Let's go down to 3 here. And let's move 3 now. This one should, but it's happening. So this is 133. That's where I left this guy. If I go back up here, it's also 133. So somehow these two are linked, and it's because there's no unique ID. So if I create a unique ID, let's try this. I'm going to set that one to 2. Okay. Now if I go back in here and I try to change this, let's see what happens. It's still doing the same. Okay. It's not the unique ID, it just doesn't know. Well, actually in the code, it got the ID that was originally there, which is 0. So even if I change this after the fact, it still sees 0 as the same one. But why isn't this one moving with the other? There's a very subtle reason this one is moving separately from the 2 that are here. So this is debug output 2 and 3. 3 is the last one, it is sitting on top of 2 because it's the last one. Let me show you what the subtle difference is. On this one, let's inspect here. This one is, notice it says element.style, and it shows it right here. Okay, now if I go down here to this one, it's not in element style, it's down here in output, debug output container. In this, so if we go back up here, debug output container also exists, but notice it's scratched through here. If I remove that, it goes underneath 2 and 3. If I do that, it comes back out. Let's go over here. Let's go back to this one. Now if I add right, and let's say 300 px, it moves it out. So now we can see, but look at, I had to put it down in the element style. So it's actually embedded right in the element. Here's the style, and here's the class. So that right there is what's causing this to come out here. If I go back here and I change this, you can see I can move it. But this one now, let's see what happens if we go back and modify just this one. Let's see if the other two stay or if they move. Let's go back into here. Now we can see it's unique. But wait, why is that? Well, these two now have element style defined, and this one doesn't. Let's look at the code. So this is output debug 1, output debug 2, and 3. Now notice that I have write for card 1 set to 550 px for the write position. Down here I have write set to 300 px, and then down here I have this one set for 50 px. If we go and look at the code for the debug component, I want to show you this is where my unique ID is saved or stored. It's outside of the component, so it's outside the component, but down in here I'm creating the ID with just the unique ID of 0. I'm not incrementing it. So I'm saving it here. Now I get the element, and notice that this is ng after view init. If you do on init, it will not work. You have to do it in after view init, because this is when your page is settled and the ID has been established. At this point, it gets the div. If the div is not null, we go in and we set the div style to right and to top. Let's go back to the web, and you see that the style is set to right and to top. Notice the differences there. Let's go back to the code. We're going to try something here. I want to go into here, and I'm going to set top on this one just so that you can see. I'm going to set it at 50 px, and on number 2 I'm going to set this one at, let's say, 150 px, and this one, let's set it at 250 px. We should see them stack one on top of the other. So let's save this, and they do stack, but not exactly the way I wanted them to. So let's go back, try again. So 3 is what's on top. So 250, 250, 150, and 50. Let's switch these around because they load in this order. That one should be showing at the top. That one should be showing next. Okay, now let's discuss why this is behaving the way it is. And this was a hard one for me to figure out. It took me quite a bit of time to figure this one out. So let's go and look at the code. I've modified a few things just to figure this out. So here's the first one, right at 550px. The top is at 50px. So it's 50 pixels from the top. Down here, right is 300 pixels from the right, 150 pixels from the top, and this one is 350 pixels from the right and 250 pixels from the top. That's what we've got over here, but this is really strange. And here's why I had difficulty. I'm seeing 1 right here. I'm seeing 3 here. I know that 2 is underneath here. Let me show you again. Let's go back in. Here's number 2. And I can prove that by changing it here. Let's make top. And let's make top 0. So there's 2. We know that 2 is underneath of it. Part of the problem I was having, let me delete that now. So part of the problem I was having is, why is this position right here? What I have been able to determine is that the position of this panel right here is because of this right here. So if I change this to, let's make this 50. So that's going to push it up to the top of the screen. Actually, no, that's the right. Let's set that back to 350. And we're going to change this so the top, so it should move up on the screen and it should be at the top of the screen now. So if we go back, we see it did move up there. But that's card 1. 3 is still here. We were modifying card 3 here. That's what we should be modifying. At least that's what we think. Okay, let's dig a little deeper. Let's go back over to the web here. And in the web, why are these 2 stacked here? And why at this particular position? And yet this one is moving. All right. So a friend of mine, Jeff Monticello, always said, when in doubt, print it out. And I did just that. I went through here and I started printing stuff out. And I always take Jeff's advice. He's really sharp on this stuff. And this is what I found. The output for 1 has the correct position. But wait a minute, it's way over here. So right should be 550. And the top should be 50. Well, that looks about right. But we get down here and output 2 should be 300. And top of 100. Let's dig a little deeper here. So here's output 1. And if we look here, it's got the 350 and the 50px. That's what we expect. So this is output 1, but that's output 3. So 3 should be over here, not 1. Let's go down here and look at this one now. This is the next one. So this one is output 1 again. And it's setting it to 350, the same thing we saw up here. But wait a minute, what is going on? So here we have 1. It's getting set to 550, not 350. And it is 50 from the top. So it's the right height, but it's 550. And this is for 1. Here we're seeing 3. Let's go down a little more. Here's 2. And again, we have 350 and 50. But here I'm seeing 300 and 150. Okay, this is puzzling. Now, let's go look at the elements again. Here's something I didn't see, and I should have. But if you go in here, notice that this is the position. So this one got overridden, and this is the very first one, and it is the debug output container for debug 1. Okay, that's this guy here. And the ID is debug output 0. It's because we're not incrementing that. So I can increment that, but I'm puzzled as to why this is positioned here. So now we come into the next one. Okay, this is also debug output 0. So rule of thumb is you should never have two IDs the same. The reason being it's always going to catch the very first ID on the page, because there should only be one ID. You can get multiple classes, but you can only get one ID. So this is violating that rule, the ID rule. So let's find out why this is a bug. And you may get this in your code and try to figure out, why did this occur? This is 150. This is debug 2. And then here's 3. Now 3 should be over here, but it's here. Okay, let me take you to the code. So in the code, I'm looking at this, I'm focused on this, and I'm thinking, why is this not working? I was looking at this and looking at the logic here. Everything is working correctly. And I know that if I do the ++ here, the problem will go away. So if I save this and go back to the web, everything is there but we can't explain why. It's important that you understand why these things are happening. Not just that, oh, I got it working. You need to understand why it's not working. Let's go back and look at, let's take out the plus, and let's look at the styles here. Does this look familiar? This is what we were looking at right here. Debug output container. If we go back to the code, line 2 is where it starts. I mean, it's the labels here, the classes here. But down here, we get into these things, and look at this. This looks quite familiar. Let's save this and go back. Let's go look at the code. So 100 and 100. 100 and 100. Let's change the right position. Let's go back to the code. Let's see if this is what's causing that problem. Let's make it 500. Okay. Now let's go back to the code, or the browser. Let's go back to the browser. And in the browser, we have something really strange happen. All of this went over here. Let me do a reset. Oh, okay. Sometimes when you just change the code and you don't do a refresh, things will look strange. So always do a refresh. Here's number 1. We know this is because the positioning of where 3 should be is where number 1 is. We know now that this is here because it's the default that was defined in the styles. Okay, let's go back to the code. Let's take these out completely. So if we take that out and we go back to our code, or go back to our browser, we see now that we have something really strange going on here. Why did this go over here? You have to remember, in the HTML, let's go look at the code here. This is the form that's above this debug window. This is where the debug window is following. But wait a minute. These are giving positions, right? Well, this last one, let's go back and look here. If you look at your, we're not incrementing it. That's why that's not changing. Let's increment that. Save. Now that we understand why the positioning is defaulting to the side of the page, now we can increment and have a unique ID for each. Let's go back to the web. And now we see that we have 1, 2 is back here, 3 is here. Let's get 3 moved over and 2 up so that we can actually look at it. Let's go back to the code. Let's go here. And we want top set to 50 for everything. So 50 picks. Actually, let's make it 100. Let's make it 100 picks for everything. For the top. Then we've got to get, so 350, that should be 350 there. That's for card 2. And card, oh, that was too much. Okay, let's look at the web page now, and we can see that they are right next to each other. Okay, now why is this working now and it didn't before? There were several problems. One problem is we had a default setting in the style sheet, and that's why things were ending up over here, and the last setting, which was for 3, was getting positioned over in this area. Now that they're working, let's take a look at why it's working. Let's go look at the console. Let's wipe this out and refresh it just so that we can see. Now we see that it's getting, here's 0, 1, and 2. Notice as I go over this, it highlights it. So now we have the correct div, and we are setting the proper div when we go and we get the ID. In this case, debug output 0. In this case, debug output 1. In this case, debug output 2. So this solves the individual positioning and getting the right stuff in there. So the problem that we've solved here is why was the last one, actually the first one, was going where the last one was positioned? Because we're always getting the first one when we did these queries. But then it was getting the last one. But then why were they all grouped here by default, no matter what we did to the others? And that's because the style sheet. So what we had to do is we had to carefully examine the style sheets. We had to print to the console. Remember what Jeff said, when in doubt, always print it out. So that's something that needs to be done. And then we went through here. So this is how you go through and you debug your code in Angular. I hope this video has helped you. Please like and subscribe, and we will continue to make more videos. Thank you.